10 millimeter powerhouse. The muscle car of the handgun world. I'm just going to go ahead and say, in my opinion, the biggest, most powerful, practical semi-auto handgun round. They're cool guns, and much like fanny packs, people seem to be rediscovering them. They're coming back into vogue. For a while, they were kind of almost dead. There was a small dedicated following, but there's kind of been a resurgence in the past several years at this point, and I think that's a great thing. So if that piques your interest, stick around for this episode of Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Try to abbreviate it. First and foremost, I am a Christian. That is number one in my life, serving God, following Jesus. Combat veteran, served in the United States Marine Corps and the Army. Also law enforcement veteran, private contractor, state rifle and pistol champion. Professional big game hunter and guide. If you feel called to support, check out Patreon. There should be a link in the show notes. With that, I am your host, Michael Melito, and I am blessed to serve you today. 10 millimeter. Let's get into it. The best, the top 10s. Some of the best 10 millimeters on the market. There's a lot more than there used to be, and that's a great thing. Now, I kind of broke these up into categories to have equal weights and equal measures as much as possible to mitigate the comparing apples to oranges. Metal and or hammer fired guns, polymer striker fired, revolvers, and PCCs. Here's my number one pick. The Colt Delta Elite. Was it the first? No. But no offense to Sonny Crockett, but the Bren 10 just doesn't make the list. Kind of a very short-lived firearm. And this is Gunfighter Life. It's a very collectible, classic gun. But the Delta Elite has been around a long time. May have been the second gun, and I'm not exactly sure about that, but designed in 10 millimeter. It is an awesome gun. 1911s are awesome gun. Colt 1911s especially are amazing guns. I know, I just sold one. They're just beautiful, magnificent guns. They're cool guns. They are battle proven. So why not get that Colt 1911 in 10 millimeter? The Colt Delta Elite. There are several models, and you can go to the more elegant side with like the two-tone, and they still make these. You can go with a modern one with a rail, full stainless. And if you've listened, you know how much I like stainless. That'd be my pick. Colt Delta Elite, full stainless with a rail. Awesome gun. And I might not even use the rail, but it's nice to have that option. And this may sound heretical to the purists in the 1911 world, but I think the ones with the rail look better. I just do. I think they look better. The original 1911 is a good looking gun. I think the modern versions with the more pronounced beaver tail and the rails and the skeletonized hammer, I just think they look better. The Colt Delta Elite, they did have some teething problems with high round count guns in the early days with cracks coming in the frame, but they rectified that pretty quick and incorporated that into, I think, all their 1911 frames, or a lot of their 1911 frames. So that should not be an issue unless you have one of the original ones, which if you're a gunfighter, you probably want one that you're actually going to shoot. But the Colt Delta Elite, and they still make them, at least they're still listed as making them. Trying to find a lot of guns they list as making now seems to be harder than I can really wrap my head around. But they do still list a Colt Delta Elite as being made, and there's a lot of models. However, that full stainless with a rail, if you want a beautiful, practical powerhouse, and you like 1911s, and you like that classic metal hammer-fired design, just came up in the chat. And by the way, you should really be thankful to the patrons. Now, we should always be thankful to God first. Without him, we could do nothing. But I threw this out in the chat. And I think I just said something like top 10 millimeters. And it became this whole thing. And now it's an episode. And a lot of these I probably wouldn't have thought of. But we also had another chat in the Patreon group not long ago about triggers. And how I was hoping the pendulum was swinging back to metal hammer-fired guns. And there's some polymer striker-fired handguns with some good triggers, like the 320, like the Walther PDP, the Canic Rival. But that's comparing them to other striker-fired triggers. I still don't think they compare to a good 1911 trigger. Even a fair 1911 trigger. It's a whole different, that's why I put them in a different category. And that Colt 1911, Colts, in my experience, they don't come with a super light trigger. And light is not what I mean when I say good, but they come with a fantastic, crisp, beautiful trigger. Even the Series 80s that a lot of people rag on, I'd rather have a Series 70, but the Series 80s still have a far better trigger, in my experience, than most polymer handguns. They have a crisp, clean, beautiful break. And the Series 80 kind of gives it a two-stage feel, which I don't care for, but it's still not mushy in my experience, which is my issue with even a lot of light polymer striker-fired handguns. They have I would describe it as a mushy trigger, and I would rather have a good, clean break 5-pound trigger than a super mushy 2.5-pound trigger. Anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent there. Let's get back to what we were talking about. The Colt Delta Elite, awesome gun. That's my number one. The number two, and a lot of just classic nostalgia came into that, but the STI Perfect 10. Now, you'll know if you've listened for any length of time, when I was a professional gunfighter, I often would carry STIs. I got mine before Staccato was a thing, I believe. Ran them a long time as a professional gunfighter. STIs are amazing. The epitome of what can be achieved in making a combat handgun shootable and user-friendly, and they're a sports car. You got to kind of know how to tune them and stay on top of them, but if you're willing to put in the work, they are just magnificent machines. And the STI Perfect 10, you take a double stack, high capacity, modular frame, 1911 with amazing triggers. I've never felt an STI with a bad trigger. I've never felt an STI Staccato with a mediocre trigger. They're awesome, and they're so smooth. I was looking for guns to sell, and my first thought was to sell one of my STIs. They're kind of too big for an everyday carry gun for me. And I took one of mine out. I have two, because when it's my go-to gun, I like to have a similar backup. And I took one out, and I was just manipulating it, and it was just so buttery smooth that I ended up selling the Colt, even though the Colt's admittedly a much prettier, nicer gun as far as aesthetics go. But the STIs are just, they're like butter. If you're used to manipulating like a Glock or a similar kind of gun, and you grab an STI, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like when you've been dirty for a really long time and you go into a nice hot shower and just so clean. They're so great. And they make one in 10mm. The STI Perfect 10. Double stack, high capacity, modular frame, Staccato. STI 2011 Perfect 10. Awesome, awesome, awesome guns. If you want a beautiful one and you want to hunt with a 1911 and 10mm, there's one that really stands out. I almost bought one once, and I thought, what am I going to do with this thing? I love handgun hunting, but I usually will handgun hunt with my go-to carry gun to make me better and more effective with the gun that I'm actually carrying. That being said, I was very tempted once to buy one of these, and I think it should be on the list there. Beautiful. They seem very practical for handgun hunting with a 10mm 1911 because they have a long slide, I believe a 6-inch barrel, and that's a Dan Wesson Kodiak. You pull up an image of a Dan Wesson Kodiak, they're just beautiful guns. They're just beautiful and practical. They would be great for handgun hunting. If you wanted a handgun hunt, you wanted a good trigger, you're familiar with the 1911, you want that extra velocity, that extra sight radius that comes with a long slide 1911, amazing choice. Dan Wesson's owned by CZ. From what I can gather, they have very good quality. I mean, CZ certainly has a good reputation as far as quality goes. But that Dan Wesson Kodiak, I think that's kind of a sleeper. A lot of people probably don't even know about it. They're beautiful aesthetically. They kind of do this really pretty, but also very practical kinds of finishes, and the G10 grips and Coyote, and you just have to pull an image of one up. This is an audio podcast, doesn't really do it justice, but they're just beautiful guns. I think a 6-inch 1911 would be a beast at EDC, everyday carry, but if you're going out to handgun hunt, it'd be a fine choice. The next one is going to be a good gun. I'm going to call it the budget pick. It's still not a cheap gun, but it's cheaper than any of the ones thus far discussed. If you want that 10mm 1911, and you want like a working one, like this may be your EDC. Maybe you live in an area where it's not just people behaving badly that you have to worry about, but I think in almost every environment, even in like rural Alaska, people behaving badly is a big threat. But you also have other threats. Maybe it's wild boar, maybe it's grizzly bears, whatever that is. And I just did a whole episode on not 9mm, when maybe 9mm is not the best choice. But if you were gonna everyday carry a 1911 and 10mm, you wanted a good working man's blue collar gun, and I think one company stands out at making a lot of guns like this, and this is going to be the slot that goes to them in this category as well, and that's the Ruger S.R. 1911. They make good 1911s. Are they a cult? No, I don't think so, but they're really close. They're made well. Ruger has always fixed guns I've seen have problems, and all guns have problems. I'm not saying this one will. I'm just saying they're a decent company as far as that goes. In my experience anyway, they've even fixed stuff that I just straight up broke, and they fixed it, sent it back to me. You think revolvers don't break? Oh, they break. But anyway, going off on another tangent, coming back, bringing it back around, circling the wagon back to the S.R. 1911. Great gun. You can get it in 10mm. It's the one that I see anyway is stainless, so if you're going to carry it, you're going to carry it out in some more wild areas. Certainly could hunt with it. You certainly could carry it as a EDC gun if you're willing to carry a 1911 size gun. It's the same size as a standard 1911 if you're familiar with that, and you just want the ballistics of a 10mm. You don't want to drop $3,500 on an STI, right? They're a good option. So that Ruger SR 1911 and 10mm is a good, solid choice. Now, thus far, we've discussed 1911 platforms because, 1911's America. But there are other designs and there are other good ones. This would be a really good choice if you want to stay in the metal hammer-fired world, but you are not really familiar with 1911s, you're not really familiar with cleaning and tuning 1911s, and a lot of the gun culture 2.0 is not, to be fair. And if you don't want to dig into that, that's fine. You can still get a really good metal-on-metal hammer-fired gun with that good trigger, with all that stuff. And you can get that, and there's other ones, but my next go-to, if I wasn't getting a 1911, I would give a good hard look at the Sig Sauer P220. They make it in 10mm. If you're not familiar, this kind of predates the 226 and 229, which are and have been popular for decades in the military, special forces, police. They were kind of based on the earlier P220. P220 originally was in 45 ACP, but if you don't know, the 10mm has the same overall length, so a lot of guns that were originally designed in 45 have also been chambered in 10mm, like the 1911 we discussed. But the P220, it's a great gun. It is very, very good and reliable. It's like the 1911. It's a single stack, but it's got a lot less moving parts. It's a simpler operating system. Trigger is not as good as a 1911, but it's still a good trigger. It's still a metal hammer-fired trigger. Comparing that trigger to comparing a Glock trigger is kind of like comparing a Honda Civic to a Ferrari. Yeah, both will do pretty much the same thing. They'll both get you down the road, but they're not the same car. A Glock trigger and a 1911 or even a Sig P2 whatever series will both make the gun go off, but it's a much better experience with a hammer-fired gun. Let's just say that. In my opinion, your opinion might differ, but to me, if you want that metal on metal, you don't want to go plastic fantastic. You want a metal hammer-fired gun, but you don't want the tuning and the cleaning and the weird disassembly of a 1911, which I'll concede those are real things. Then you might look at the SIG P220 and 10mm. There's been a couple of different models. There's the Legion model. If you don't know, the Legion is like the creme de la creme. If you think of the SIG series as like different coffee places, I would consider the SIG Legion like the Dutch brothers of their series. It's just kind of the best tasting. They're really good versions of the Legion. In a lot of the different categories, they make them in the polymer striker fires as well, but they also make a Legion version of the P220 and 10mm. They also, I think, made one a while back in Cryptex. I don't know that they make that anymore, but that one also really cool if you're looking for a hunting gun. I will concede that you don't need camo a lot of the times, especially to hunt big game, but if you wanted one in Cryptex, you just like that, that's kind of your thing. They also made one like that. But a great, elegant, more modern, simplistic, but still kind of that old world taste of craftsmanship, design. You may look at that P220 10mm. Really cool gun. Now there is another one. This will be the last one in this group before we transition to the plastic polymer striker fired handguns that are so in vogue for the past, I don't know, decade or so. And this one's kind of an in-between world. They've been around a while. Tanfoglio. Who? Tanfoglio, man. Repping the 10mm for the Italians. They've been around a while. They've been around years and years. They're kind of a sleeper as well. I don't know the exact mechanics. I've never owned a Tanfoglio, but they seem to work just fine. They've been around a while. They seem to be loosely based on the CZ75 platform, which is a good platform. Was the CZ75 designed under communism? Yeah, it was. That doesn't make it a bad gun. The Mauser 98, arguably one of the best bolt actions in history, was used by the Nazis. That doesn't make it a bad gun. To be fair, I think that predates that, going back into the Kaiser days, but you get where I'm going. It's a good design. It seemed to be okay in beefing it up to 10mm. I see some metal ones. I see some polymer ones. That's why it's kind of in this quasi in-between kind of world here. And they can be very affordable. So if you want an affordable 10mm, but you don't want a plastic striker fired, you're kind of in between, then you might look at the Tanfoglio. Kind of a sleeper, but being made for a while, this basic design, so I got to imagine there's some merit to it. Now, transitioning to the polymer striker fired. And I'm going to have to put the SIG 320 10mm in the first spot. And I really love the Smith & Wesson M&P, which we'll get to, but here's the rub. When you get to these polymer handguns, usually what they try to do is shove as many rounds as they can into a handgun, in my opinion, without making it ridiculous. A lot of people buy guns based on capacity. Well, this one holds 2 more rounds. It must be a better gun. Here's the issue. I'm not a big fan of that in general, but especially when you get into these large frame guns, double stack 45s and double stack 10mm are big, big handguns. They're a big, beefy grip. Go pick up a Mark 23. The often jokingly referred to as the crew serve handgun. It's a great gun, it's just huge. And I've been doing a series recently, I may continue it on Patreon, Dry Fire with Melito, and I talk about proper stance and grip. And in demonstrating this, I have pictures and video where I want to relax my arm and let that handgun hang down, and I want the tip of that front sight in line all the way up my arm to my shoulder. And when I rest my finger on that trigger, I want the center of the pad. If you look at your finger, God gave us this wonderful thing. The center of that swirl, the center of that pad, you want it to rest on the center of that trigger. And some of these guns get so big that I can't do that. If you have really big hands, maybe you can. For a lot of people, you have to cock these guns to actually be able to squeeze the trigger properly, which means instead of that recoil going into your whole hand and your arm and your body, it goes a lot into your thumb, which is not good. Not as good. Can I shoot them? Yeah. Can you shoot them? Yeah. Can you shoot them effectively? Okay. But can you shoot them as effectively as a gun that actually puts the recoil in a straight line instead of cocking it into your thumb? And that's a big reason why I'm going to put the 320 10mm in the first spot, because it's modular and you get grip modules, and I can take the competition shooter and gunsmith's really good friend, the Dremel tool, and I can Dremel a bunch on that grip module. If I mess it up, didn't destroy the whole gun, will I take a Dremel to an STI or an M&P? Sure I will. I've done it. That was one of the first things I did when I got my STI, because I'm going to run it, I'm going to use it. I took a Dremel to it so it would fit my hand. But if you do that with the 320, if there's no aftermarket grip modules that fit you better, you can take a Dremel to it, and you haven't destroyed the entire gun. If you really go crazy and take too much off, you can just get another grip module, and you're out 50, 60, 70 bucks. I don't know with inflation what they cost, but they're not, $500, $800 like you have to buy a whole new frame. And when you get into these big double-stacked guns, these large-frame double-stacked guns, for being honest, I think a lot of the times they're too big. The average person can effectively fit a 1911 single-stack grip in 45 or 10mm, but if you just have really big hands, then yeah, maybe it's not an issue. But if you have not really big hands, and I don't know what the average hand size is, then that's going to be an issue. Just want a 10mm to go to the range and just shoot rounds of 10mm, but if you want it to be more effective and fit you properly, I think I have to give that to the SIG 320. That modularity really comes in handy in this situation, and that's why I'm putting it in the number one spot. All the other good things about a 320 that I like, I'm not a SIG fanboy, but they really did a good job. The triggers on these for a polymer striker fired handgun are really good. I haven't messed with the trigger on the 10mm to be fair, but I have seen these guns, the older ones, they came out in 45 a while ago. I'm familiar with that gun, a good gun. So I got to assume the 10mm is good as well. The triggers on the 320 are very good. The trigger's so easy, the gun shoots itself. I'm just kidding. They fixed that problem. The earlier models did have an issue where you could hit them in the back of the pistol and the gun will go off without the trigger being pulled. But the newer models don't have that problem, or don't seem to have that problem. I imagine they fixed that a long time ago, well before the 10mm came out. But they do have a really good trigger as far as polymer striker fired handguns go, and that modularity. And the 320s really have kind of taken the market by storm. And I think there's a lot of good reasons for that. I did a whole episode on the M17. I did two, actually. The gun or handgun I hate to love, and a year in review. And you can go listen to those and apply what you want to that to the 320 and 10mm. But that would probably be, it is my number one pick for polymer striker fired. The next one, the Smith & Wesson M&P, and I love Smith & Wesson M&Ps. The normal frame Smith & Wesson M&P, the 9mm, and that similar size, they fit my hand, I'd say, as good out of the box as any polymer striker fired handgun. They have the best ergonomics for me, in my opinion. The large frames, not so much. Again, they're just really wide. Now, they're better than some, but it's still a big, big, fat grip. And that's why they're not in the number one spot, but they have really good ergonomics. If you're not going to change, if you're not the kind of person that's going to Dremel a gun anyway, you just want good out of the box ergonomics, they do have some modularity in the different grip modules that you can interchange. And they're a good gun. And the things I like about Smith & Wesson M&P, stainless steel slides, really, really simple design, very simple, rugged, great extractors. They come with good sights. So does the SIG for that matter. But they're good guns. I think they solidly deserve a second place in the polymer striker fired handgun world. American company, American made, solid. Pulling up the rear, my last choice, the Glock 10mm. These have just a regular Glock to me has the ergonomics of a 2x4. The large frames kind of have the ergonomics of a 4x4. I don't know whose hands they fit, but it is not mine. When I was a police officer, I carried a Glock for a long time, started competition shooting with a Glock. Back in the day when everybody said, you got to have at least a 40 and a 45 is better. Well, I went to 45 and I carried a Glock 21. But when I was a cop, I thought I was a really good shooter. And then I actually went to competitions and realized I wasn't that great of a handgun shooter. And the Glock 20, that size, big frame, you talk about a big frame. Again, if it fits your hand, but it certainly doesn't fit my hand, and I got to imagine it doesn't fit many people's hands. Can you shoot them? Yes. Can I shoot them? Yes. Could I shoot them well? Yeah, but I can't shoot them nearly as well as something that actually would align, or I wouldn't have to change my grip every time I shot it. That would give me straight back recoil, or the gun wasn't cocking and torquing to the side when I shot it. If you just want a high capacity 10mm that will make a lot of noise and go off, then a projectile down range when you pull the trigger, Glock 20, there you go. If you're just a Glock guy, and a lot of people are, they walk down the aisle with that Glock and commit themselves to Glock. If that's you, then the Glock 20 and all the other variants of it, which also include the Glock 29, and there's some short frame versions of these. If I was going that way, I certainly would go the short frame route. There's the Glock 29 if you just want a smaller, compact 10mm, and the Glock 40 if you want a super long slide. To be fair to the Glock 20 or the Glock 29, I think those would be a fantastic choice for bear defense if you wanted a 10mm semi-auto. You weren't planning on hunting with it, you weren't planning on using it for personal defense from people, you just wanted a bear defense semi-auto 10mm that was going to be reliable. And the trigger pull on it when a bear is trying to gnaw off your face is kind of less relevant, let's say. It would not be a bad choice for that. So I'll give some redemption there for the Glock 20, 29. So that's going to be it for the polymer striker fires on my list for 10mm. Now, one category I didn't even think of until a patron brought it up. It has some very, let's say, divergent taste in firearms. Revolvers in 10mm. Yes, they do make revolvers in 10mm. The two I'm going to mention, and there probably are more, but the Smith & Wesson, they have a couple of models in 10mm, I believe. The 610 can be had in different barrel lengths. Now you do run into some issues because this is not a revolver cartridge. Revolver cartridges in general have rims. I don't want to talk down to you, but there's people that are in varying degrees of their gun knowledge. So you run into some issues, but if those issues don't bother you and you just want a wheel gun that shoots 10mm, which will also shoot, or should shoot, 40 Smith & Wesson, check the manual on that. I don't know if they recommend that. I'm not exactly sure how they do their head spacing because, again, it doesn't have a rim and most revolver cartridges will head space on the rim. Don't want to get too technical, but they do make wheel guns if you want a revolver in 10mm. That's 610, pretty cool gun. Ruger also makes the GP100, which is a fantastic handgun. And they even make a match champion in 10mm, which is kind of quizzical to me, but I guess not that quizzical, because if I had to pick one, that'd probably be the one that I picked. I've owned a match champion in the past. They're phenomenal guns. Mine was in the more traditional 357-38 special, and if I was getting another one, I'd probably get that, to be fair. But if I had to pick a 10mm revolver, that match champion, that's a cool gun. So the Ruger GP100 match champion in 10mm, that's pretty cool. So again, if you want, 10mm is becoming so popular, you even got a couple of options if you want it in a wheel gun. Now, let's say you're prepping for the peanut butter and chocolate hitting the fan. I consider myself a survivalist and a prepper. I don't apologize for that. I like breathing air and eating food, and while I continue to be on this earth in this earthly tent, I would like to do so. I don't apologize for that. Maybe you think when the peanut butter and chocolate hits the fan, the 10mm is the best choice for you. 9mm is just not going to be enough for the zombie grizzly bears or whatever your thing you're envisioning. You think 10mm is a good all-around choice. You want to go that old kind of preparedness route where you have your handgun and your long gun chambered in the same cartridge. Well, you get some pretty cool options in 10mm. Did you know that the HK MP5 came in 10mm? The MP5 is an amazing gun. The 10mm is an amazing cartridge. MP5 and 10mm, that's got to be my number one pick. I mean, that's just awesome. MP5 10mm. Now, I like PCCs. I like MP5s. I like them more in full auto, even if I don't generally shoot them in full auto. That being said, you're probably not just going to the local gun store and picking up an MP5 and 10mm, but they're so cool. I had to put them on the list, and I had to put them number one because the MP5 is just a legendary PCC, and if you can get one in 10mm, that's pretty neat. Now the other ones, Patreon pick, and these are really good too. The CMMG is a good company. They have a really cool design for their PCCs instead of going straight blowback, which has some merits. It has some advantages and disadvantages. Disadvantages being recoil, weight of the bolt. They do this cool thing called radial delayed blowback. It's just a delaying system to let that pressure drop before the bolt moves. And they kind of machine the bearing surface on the bolt head to an angle. I don't want to get too technical into that, but it seems to work pretty well. And they make the CMMG Banshee, which is kind of their short or their PCC, in 10mm. That would be a phenomenal gun. I think it would have a lot of merit in reducing recoil, especially in a 10mm in a small PCC. And no, when I say PCC, I'm not getting into the whole what ATF considers a pistol or a rifle or a carbine or whatever that. I'm talking about from practical use. It's a small, handy carbine. However it is quantified or classified by rules and regulations. I'm talking about from a user standpoint. And a practical description. CMMG Banshee, they're cool, and how do you make a PCC cooler? Well, I'd put it in 10mm. Another patron mentioned this one, the Chris. The Chris in full auto I think has merit. The Chris in semi-auto, I think it's a lot of added complexity for I don't know how much benefit. That may be unwarranted or unfair, but they do make it in 10mm. And one of the big claims to fame in the Chris is that recoil, I don't even know what they call it, a counterweight, counterbalance system where, and I assume if you're listening to this, you fired a firearm, it recoils generally the path of least resistance. Since most of your body weight and mass and strength is down, the gun generally recoils up. Well, this gun has a system in which to force mass down when you fire to mitigate's not the right word. Maybe mitigate is the right word, to kind of mitigate some of that recoil. So if you're going to do that, might as well do it in a 10mm. So the Chris in 10mm, it's a thing. Wouldn't be my thing, but if you want it to be your thing, do what you want to do. And I gotta throw in a really cool budget, practical 10mm. Now I wouldn't do this in a handgun, but the high point carbines. Say what you want about them, but they work. They make a high point carbine in 10mm. If you want a fun carbine on a budget that fires 10mm, now if you're on a budget, you probably don't want to buy 10mm, but it's just a really cool gun, and they've been out a while now, and I haven't heard any recalls or anything on them. I don't know how much the bolt on that thing weighs, because I do believe the high point carbines are straight blowback. So I don't know about that, but they seem to work just fine. And the high point carbines are a budget PCC that just works. So I gotta mention those, I think, and that's gonna be the last 10mm on this list. If you want to contact me for whatever reason, prayer, advice, constructive criticism, good, heck, even persecution. Jesus said we will be persecuted, right? GoodShepherdTraining.com. GoodShepherdTraining.com. Should be a link to GoodShepherdTraining.com and Patreon in the show notes. If you thought this was at least entertaining, useful, and practical, you want to support the message. You want to support the podcast, a podcast that you can listen to without the foul language, without the blasphemy, you use the Lord's name in vain. You just want to support, become an active member of the tribe. You can do that with the Patreon link. Just go to Patreon, Do all kinds of cool stuff on there. Hopefully the patrons think it's cool. I have insider chat, which I've alluded to many times. I also just did an area study of the lower 48, the U.S. states, and bug out areas, different factors and all that. Many cool things like that on there. Anyway, if you want to check that out, become a patron. Link in the show notes. With that, tactical tip of the day, and then the verse of the day. Tactical tip of the day. That was me blowing in a plastic bottle, if you care. Anyway, tactical tip of the days came up recently in a chat. Shooting sticks. Not the big tripods. I'm talking about sleek shooting sticks, monopods. I was a professional big game hunter and guide, which you probably know if you listen to the bio. They were quite common and are quite common in the PH, professional hunting and guiding world. And I would say mostly for clients. And here's why I pontificate as to why they are. A lot of people, especially a lot of people nowadays, shoot off a bench. And they almost exclusively shoot off a bench or with a rest, some kind of rest. And a lot of actual real-world hunting shots are taken offhand, meaning standing, unsupported. But a lot of people aren't comfortable with that. Confidence is a big part of shooting. So if you can just give them a monopod, a stick in the ground with a top on it, or two sticks that cross, and they can just set their gun on it, it just gives them more confidence. It makes them feel more familiar because their gun is rested on something. That being said, I think that's a crutch. That being said, crutches are a thing for a reason. Sometimes crutches are useful and helpful. I've had to have a crutch before, or more notably a cane. There was a time when I was injured so bad I couldn't walk. So they are useful. Crutches are useful. That being said, try to train in such a way that you don't need them, but they are useful. I saw a lot of guides carry. Now I have one as well, but I never used one in an actual hunting scenario to take an animal. I never saw a guide use one. Maybe some do, but they were for clients for that reason. I generally had them for the clients, not themselves. And another big reason is I think a lot of hunters, especially people that don't shoot that much or hunt that much, they get a lot more gun than they need. And maybe more gun than they're comfortable shooting. And a lot of shooters in general, whether it's too much gun or not, have a flinch. And a lot of people, when they flinch, they pull that gun down. So you can have this physical barrier, this physical object connected to the ground that mitigates that being able to shove that gun down when somebody flinches. So that's kind of some thoughts on shooting sticks. I'm not telling you not to use them or not to have one. I have one. And I often would recommend them if a client needs them. Because let's be honest, I don't want to spend days tracking a wounded gut shot animal because somebody flinched, which is not an unheard of thing. Be honest with yourself. If you know you're not going to train to shoot offhand or work out that flinch, or you just want a really big heavy hitting gun, you might look at shooting sticks. I'm not talking about the big tripods and the big heavy things. Here's the difference. If I'm hunting really nasty, gnarly country, I like to have trekking poles anyway, or something like that can help me cover either more country or more dangerous country, or carry more weight without getting injured. I don't want a big thing that's an additional thing that I have to carry in addition to all the other stuff I have to carry. If I'm already carrying trekking poles or a trekking pole, having it be able to do double duty, whether you just take a regular trekking pole and make some kind of apparatus on top to use as a shooting stick, or buy a monopod shooting stick that you can use as a trekking pole. I think that makes a lot more sense, because now I have a trekking pole which I'm likely to use anyway, so I don't slip down a shale bank and break my ankle, or ford a creek or stream or whatever it is without falling with a gun and a heavy pack and get soaking wet. Those trekking poles, a trekking pole 1 or 2 is nice. And if I can use that as double duty for if somebody I'm taking hunting needs to take a shot or whatever, why not have that duality of function? Really, here's a tactical tip inside the tactical tip. If you have 2 trekking poles, sometimes I'll use 2, sometimes I'll use 1. Either just buy the monopod with the top already on it, but if you want a really good pair of trekking poles and you want to do this, you can just tie, if you know much about knots, and I think that's a manly skill you should know, you can basically tie a piece of 550 cord, put the other trekking pole in it, and you have what we're talking about. So Give it some thought. Maybe it's right for you. Maybe it's not right for you. Maybe you hunt in fairly flat land and you hunt in a blind or in a stand where that doesn't really apply to you at all. I think for people familiar with them, they're kind of this mystery. But hopefully that clarifies, or at least my thoughts on shooting sticks. Tactical verse of the day. But the Lord is faithful, who will establish you and guard you from the evil one. I don't care how big and bad of an alpha male gunfighter you think you are, it's a fool's errand to try and go toe-to-toe with the devil. When Satan comes to Jesus, God made man in the flesh, in the 40 days of fasting in the wilderness, Jesus rebukes him and comes at him with the word of God, which we see in other places is the sword of the Spirit, the offensive weapon listed for our spiritual warfare, the word of God. He says, man does not live by bread alone when he tempts him. I read this today and talk about understatement. It said Jesus was fasting or not eating for 40 days and he was hungry. I bet he was hungry. I can't even imagine fasting for 40 days. There's a whole other level of fasting I can't even comprehend. And he was hungry. And Satan comes to him and says, turn these stones into bread. And he comes at him with the word of God. Man shall not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Now, we had in the military something we'd refer to as a hip pocket class. I mean, you might have a guy who was familiar in a certain subject, and if you ever had some downtime, you may want to use that to teach other men. You whip this thing out of your hip pocket and start teaching on it. I think it's important as warriors in Christ, modern day crusaders, to have these hip pocket verses that when Satan comes, you rebuke him in the word. That's what Jesus did, and we're called to follow his example. Whatever those verses are for you. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. If God is for me, who can be against me? While I was yet without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly. There is real war and conflict, physical, on this earth, but oftentimes the hardest battle to win is the battle in your mind. Have those tactical verses to guard against the evil one. Go to God for help to guard against the evil one. I go again to the verse we started with. But the Lord is faithful, who will establish you and guard you from the evil one. And another. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. With that, gunfighters, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.